Well, first of all, thank you, Dave, very much for the invitation, for this kind words of yours. Please be gentle. This is the first time I've ever done this, so... No. As you can see, I still didn't press the button, but I will now. Okay. A certain notion exists that sport has two important historical phases. The phase of innocence before the First World War, when sport was considered to be pure and unspoiled, and the phase of compromise after the war, when sport started to feel the heavy pressure of politics and ideology. Now, I would like to use the region of Southeastern Europe as an example that this notion is not always 100% true. The region of Southeastern Europe, a fancy name for Balkans, was the region disturbed by political, ethnic and religious turbulences, and it was like that throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. Divided between two rusty empires, Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, with independent and restless Serbia and Montenegro, and with numerous nations fighting for independence or political and cultural recognition. Balkans enjoyed fruits of contacts with the developed Western world, not just regarding the important stuff, but also regarding the way modern Europeans were living their lives. In the period. 1860 saw the first sporting manifestations in the region, usually sporting competitions between the visiting foreigners, English, Germans, Hungarians or Czechs. The small but influential domestic elite mimicked the foreigners and the strange habits. First proper sporting institution is in Southeastern Europe with the Sokols, or the Falcons, a gymnastics organization which originated in Czech lands but had rapidly spread throughout the Slavic South. Sports history make a clear distinction between gymnastics and sporting clubs, but in the region the distinction is not that clear. The Sokols were pioneers, and within the Sokols other sporting teams were created. Sokols combined gymnastics, both Swedish and German, with elements from Slavic folklore and mythology, and also Czech nationalist political ideology. They much resembled German Turnverein. Sokols gathered liberal and nationalist youth, and their jamborees became spectacles of nationalism and anti-Habsburg sentiment. Okay. The political dimension of the Sokols was very appealing to the young Slavs who were being oppressed by both Habsburg officials and local conservative Catholic authorities. In 1863, young Slovenian enthusiasts founded the Southern Sokol in Ljubljana, the first sporting association in Southeastern Europe, but also the pillar of all liberal and progressive actions in Slovenia in years to come. Very soon the same processes happened in Croatia, Dalmatia. Dissatisfied young men formed Sokol groups all over the land. Those Sokol groups were multi-ethnic. Both Croats and Serbs were founders and active members. This Serbo-Croatian Sokol partnership suggested that only the unity of those two ethnic groups could represent a serious danger for Austria-Hungary. As the time went by, the Sokol groups gradually gave birth to proper sporting teams. Smaller groups were allocating with the desire to pursue individual sports, football, cycling, rowing, athletics, etc. Football clubs in Croatia, Dalmatia followed the Sokol patterns. They were open for all ethnicities and religions, but their ethos was very anti-establishment and anti-Austrian. In 1911, a nationalist football club was formed in Dalmatia called Hajduk, or Brigand, which was a name very offensive to the authorities. One of their first matches was against the ethnic club of Dalmatian Italians called Calcio Spalato. The match turned into an ethnically fueled violence, with Hajduk representing Croatian population of the city. After this, Hajduk became one of the most powerful symbols of Croatian nationalism in the region. Similar things happened all over the Austro-Hungarian parts of the region. The sporting clubs were either civic and inevitably anti-Austrian, or organized on purely ethnic principles, clubs of Hungarians, Italians, Germans or Jews, in which case they were politically opposed to popular football clubs. In cases when those clubs could meet, it would certainly represent both sporting but also political event. Case of independent Serbia was a bit different, but still in a way similar to Slavic parts of Austria-Hungary. Their gymnastics organizations were also adopted from Czech lands, and Sokol represented the first sporting organizations in the country, gathering the educated and the liberal elite. Well, okay. Also, Serbian society saw another form of physical culture developing, a more nationalist and more introspective. In the 1870s and 1880s, the so-called chivalrous societies were being born, deeply rooted in Serbian medieval traditions. Their members were trying to recreate their romantic visions of the past times, the strongly developed especially medieval combat styles and games. Confrontation between the Sokols and the Chevaliers was not just symbolical but also ideological. The Sokols were raised on the ideology of pan-Slavism, while the Chevaliers were more conservative in their beliefs and were rooted in Serbian exceptionalism and traditionalism. Eventually, both of those movements managed to find a common ground: nationalism and expansionism. and in 1908 they united into a single organization. The far-reaching effect of the activities of those two organizations was ideologization of all physical culture and sports in the country, and subsequently weakness to the influence of nationalist organizations, both private and governmental. Taking to the account that young army officers were especially keen members of Sokols and Chevaliers, Serbian army became one of the leading sports authorities in the country. In fact, Serbian army was the first national institution to implement certain sporting procedures in training of the recruits, such as obligatory gymnastics, way before gymnastics was introduced to schools. Also, various martial arts, fencing, horseback riding became standard repertoire in the activities of young soldiers and officers. The militarization of sports and physical culture had very serious consequences for the further development of sports. Serbian Olympic Committee, founded in 1910, was in fact completely organized by army officers. The first chairman of the Serbian Olympic Committee and Serbian member of the IOC was Major Svetomir Đukić, one of the leading young stars of the officers' corps. This fancy chap here. The power and influence of the army, the Sokols and the Chevaliers was visible even in those sports and sporting clubs that were nominally independent and result of the private initiative. Even the football clubs were in a way pressured to express Serbian nationalism, militarism and expansionism. For instance, two of the most famous football clubs in the country were called Serbian Sword and Greater Serbia. The political significance of sporting association was best seen during the First World War. Fearing the potential uprisings, Austro-Hungarian government disbanded the Sokol and sporting associations in Slovenia, Croatia, Dalmatia and Bosnia, arguing that those kinds of organizations were spreading dangerous Yugoslav ideology and sympathy for the enemies of the empire. On the other hand, Serbian sporting and gymnastics associations during the war represented the perfect recruiting pool for young, determined and driven fighters. Not just in Serbia, but all over the world actually, because by 1914 many of the sporting organizations, especially Sokols, had spread throughout the world wherever Serbs and Croats lived. During the First World War, Serbian and Croatian Sokols in North and South America were the strongest nationalist organizations, arranging relief actions, pressure groups, propaganda, and most importantly, organizing the volunteers for the front line. An estimated 20,000 volunteers joined the ranks of Serbian army from North American Sokol organizations alone. In the end, I would like to conclude this. You cannot set rules what sport was like in 19th and 20th century, because the different regions had, with different political development, had basically different ways of developing sport, especially in the regions which were heavily influenced by politics, heavily influenced by ethnic divisions, religious divisions. Sport was from the very, very beginning a tool of political and national struggle. And I would say that the regions, for instance, the Poland, which was divided between Russia and Germany and Austro-Hungarian Empire in the Central Europe, other parts of the world as well, simply give us evidence that was the case, that sport was a majorly influenced by politics and nationalism in late 18th and early 19th and early 20th centuries. Thank you.